In the British Museum's basement archives, 40 clay tablets sit in a single temperature-controlled drawer. The series is called Sakiku, the disease guide of the Babylonian scholar Esagil-kin-apli, put together around 1050 BCE from sources the scribes themselves called ancient. It holds roughly 3,000 numbered entries, each one describing the symptoms of a specific disease. Scholars treated it as the world's first medical textbook. What nobody knew was that 15 of those entries describe conditions no living human has ever been diagnosed with. Modern primates still carry every one of them. Humans do not. If you'd asked anyone at the British Museum's Department of Western Asiatic Antiquities in 1923 about the bottom drawer of the Mesopotamian medical records, they would have told you it held the standard reference set. 40 tablets, cuneiform writing, from the late Bronze Age. Useful for studying old languages, not useful to anyone practicing medicine in the modern world. They had no idea what they were sitting on. That set was Sakiku, sometimes translated as symptoms and diagnoses, sometimes as when a healer approaches the sick man. It was put together in Babylon during the rule of Adad-apla-iddina, who ruled from 1068 to 1047 BCE. The man who put it together was a senior scholar named Esagil-kin-apli, attached to the Temple of Marduk. His role was technical. He took the existing medical writings, which by then had been copied and recopied for over 1,000 years, and made them consistent. 40 tablets, 3,000 entries, each entry numbered, each symptom described, each expected outcome recorded in a fixed layout that left no room for guessing. It is the world's first medical textbook in the formal sense. Today, hit subscribe. The deep dives we do on hidden archaeology and ancient genetics drop weekly, and the next one is going to make this one look small. The layout of each entry was tight. The scribe records the symptom first, then the affected part of the body, then the expected outcome. He will live, he will not survive, he will recover after some time, his condition is hopeless. There is no religion in Sakiku. There are no offerings, no chants, no demons named. It reads, even by modern standards, like a medical reference. Esagil-kin-apli was not interested in why the gods made people sick. He was interested in naming the disease and predicting the outcome. For 2 centuries after the first tablets were dug up at Nineveh in 1849, Western scholars treated Sakiku as a historical curiosity. The translations were slow, the terms were strange. Most of the diseases the Babylonians named could be matched, with some effort, onto modern conditions. Tuberculosis appears. Various fevers appear. Skin conditions, eye conditions, paralysis cases, brain seizures. The Babylonian scribes had sharp medical eyes, and the medicine they were writing down was old, even when they wrote it down. Then there were the 15 entries that nobody could place. Pay attention to this next detail because it explains everything. The first scholar to flag them was a German scholar of ancient Assyria named Franz Kocher, who spent 40 years listing Mesopotamian medical texts at the Akademie der Wissenschaften in Berlin. Between 1963 and 1980, Kocher published 6 volumes under the title Die Babylonisch-Assyrische Medizin, the standard reference for the field. In Volume 4, he made a brief note, almost in passing. 15 of Sakiku's numbered entries described diseases that had no modern match. The symptoms were precise. The body parts were named. The expected outcomes were given, but the conditions, taken as written, did not exist. Kocher's working guess was that the descriptions were damaged or that the diseases had been translated wrong. He did not have the genetic tools to check otherwise. He filed the note in a footnote and moved on. The footnote sat there for 40 years. Then, in the early 2000s, a different field caught up. The Human Genome Project, finished in 2003, gave researchers their first full read of human DNA. Within a decade, the same had been done for chimpanzees, gorillas, bonobos, and orangutans. The comparison was sharp. Humans and chimpanzees share roughly 98.7% of their DNA. The remaining 1.33% is where every difference between our species lies: bone structure, brain development, language, disease weakness. Especially disease weakness. Read that again. The genetic differences between humans and our closest primate relatives are not random. They group up. They group heavily in genes that control how the body fights off infection, how cells show sugar molecules on their surfaces, how the body takes in nutrients, and how certain germs recognize their targets. Chimpanzees and gorillas suffer from a long list of viruses, parasites, and germ infections that simply do not affect modern humans, not because we have better hygiene, because our biology cannot host them. The pattern is steady across studies. Humans have been changed, at the genetic level, in ways that remove specific disease weaknesses, and the changes look surgical. That was the moment Kucher's footnote stopped being a footnote. There's a reason this story is still talked about today inside narrow academic circles. Because when researchers in 3 separate fields, Assyriology, ancient gene study, and comparing primate immune systems, started comparing notes, the 15 Babylonian entries lined up. Not loosely. Not by reading. Entry by entry. The conditions Esagil-kin-apli described, the ones that had no modern match, were diseases that modern primates still suffer from and modern humans do not. In other words, the Babylonian scribes had documented illnesses that no longer existed in their patients. They had inherited the entries from sources their own tradition called pre-flood. The medical record had outlived the medicine it described, and somewhere between the writing of those source texts and the modern human genome, 15 specific conditions had been removed. Almost nobody outside the field has ever heard about this part. The Anunnaki creation texts had been describing exactly that process for 4,000 years. While Esagil-kin-apli was putting together the disease guide in Babylon in the 11th century BCE, copying from sources he himself called ancient, a separate body of Sumerian texts had already been describing the creation of human beings as a technical step carried out across multiple versions. The man who built Sakiku knew those texts. They sat in the same temple libraries. He would have copied prayers, omens, and star records out of the same archives where the creation tablets were held. The most relevant of those tablets is a Sumerian poem kept across multiple Penn Museum CBS fragments dug up at Nippur. The poem is called Enki and Ninmah, sometimes Enki and Ninhursag in older spellings. It survives in pieces across multiple copies. The first full scholarly edition is the 1969 University of Pennsylvania doctoral thesis by Carlos Benito, with later work by Samuel Noah Kramer and Wilfrid Lambert. The text dates in its earliest copies to around 2500 BCE, but the underlying writing is much older. The poem describes a contest. The mother goddess Ninmah, sometimes called Ninhursag, sometimes Nintud, sits with the wisdom god Enki and a pile of clay. The terms of the contest are stated up front. Ninmah shapes broken human beings from the clay. Enki must find a place for each one in human society. If Enki wins, his role as the chief designer of humanity is confirmed. If he fails, Ninmah takes over. She shapes 6 of them, one at a time. The poem names each defect in clear detail. The first is a man whose hands shake so badly he cannot grip. The second is a man with frozen eyes who cannot see. The third has paralyzed feet and cannot walk. The fourth cannot hold his water. The fifth is a barren woman. The sixth has been read different ways across translations, including as a being with no clear role for having children or another body issue. Enki finds a place for each of them. The shaking man becomes a court attendant whose tremor is not noticed. The blind man becomes a musician at the king's court, where blindness does not matter. The paralyzed man becomes a weaver who works seated. The man who cannot hold his water is given a role in temple service that does not need ritual cleanness. The barren woman becomes a court servant, and so on. Each defect is matched to a station where it does not rule the person out. Then the contest reverses. Enki, having found a place for every broken form Ninmah made, shapes his own creation from the clay and asks Ninmah to decide its fate. That creation is named Umul. Umul is described as a being whose every system fails at once, limbs that will not extend, eyes that cannot focus, a mouth that cannot take food, a bowel that cannot handle it. Ninmah examines Umul and gives up the contest. There is no role in human society that fits a being whose biology is deeply broken. The poem ends with Enki declared the chief designer, and the meaning is clear. The broken forms Ninmah made and the disastrous opposite example Enki made to close out the bet were not finished products. They were early versions, failed drafts on either side of the contest. And after the contest, the designers moved on to a version of the human that did not have those flaws. The clinical detail in the Umul passage is what most translators flag. The poem does not describe Umul as a being who is dying, it describes Umul as a being who was never made to work in the first place. Every joint, every reflex, every digestive step is named one by one as failing. The reading the text supports, against the older mythological reading, is that the bet is documenting failure modes that the designers needed to find and remove before wide production. Umul is the version that gets pulled from the line. The Atrahasis epic, the older Old Babylonian creation story kept on tablets like BM 78941 and BM 78942 in the British Museum, describes the same process in different terms. In Atrahasis, humans are made out of clay mixed with the blood of a slain god named Wi-Ilah, sometimes spelled Wi or Ilawela. The mixture is shaped by Ninma and given life by Enki. The text states clearly that the design has a purpose. Humans are made to carry the work that the lower gods refuse to carry any longer. But the relevant line in Atrahasis is not about why humans were made. It is about what they were given and what they were not. The text says humans were given a heartbeat, breath, the ability to reason, and a set length of life. The phrase the text uses for that last feature, in Lambert and Millard's standard translation, is a phrase that means appointed term. The gods built a timer into the design. It was not a side effect. It was a feature. A specific detail was a warning sign. The translators ignored it. Hold that for a moment, because the 15 entries are about to start making sense. Going back to Sakiku and walking the list against the genetic record, the pattern is clean enough that it does not need reading between the lines. The first cluster, entries 27 through 31 in the standard numbering of Tablet 3, describes a wasting disease that begins with weakness in the lower limbs and moves to total paralysis over a period of weeks. The Babylonian scribe lists no remedy. The outcome is fixed. The patient will not recover. The condition, as described, matches closely with the symptoms of trypanosomiasis, the parasite disease that modern primates catch from the tsetse fly. Modern humans are nearly safe from the most deadly strain. The reason is a gene called APOL1, which builds a protein in human blood that kills the parasite on contact. Chimpanzees and gorillas do not have the working version of that gene. Humans do. Sakiku describes the disease. Modern humans cannot get it. The second cluster, entries in Tablet 5, describes a long-running swelling condition in the upper airways, with bloody discharge and a long worsening curve. The match is a class of monkey retroviruses that infect chimpanzees widely. Humans are protected by a sialic acid difference made by a change in the CMAH gene, which switched off in the human line somewhere around 2 to 3 million years ago. Once that single sugar molecule disappeared from the surface of human cells, an entire family of viruses lost the receptor they needed to bind. The viruses cannot recognize human tissue. Sakiku describes the symptoms in detail. Modern humans cannot host the germ. The third cluster, entries in Tablet 7, describes a fever pattern combined with muscle wasting that matches a primate herpes virus reservoir. Same story. Humans have a receptor type that blocks the virus from entering. The Babylonian scribe was treating a disease his modern descendants are biologically unable to catch. The fourth and fifth clusters describe a liver disorder that moves through 3 named stages and a brain and nerve disorder with seizures, shaking, and loss of speech. The liver disorder matches a primate-only hepatitis type that humans no longer host. The brain and nerve disorder matches a monkey foamy virus reservoir, the same family of viruses that researchers like Nathan Wolfe documented in Central African primate populations starting in the late 1990s. Foamy viruses are nearly universal in great apes. They are nearly absent in humans. The protein humans used to block them was not present in our last common ancestor with chimpanzees. It appeared somewhere along the human line after the split and stayed. The 6th, 7th, and 8th clusters describe a wearing down bone condition, a long-running breathing wasting condition, and a pattern of failure to have children. Each one matches a known primate disease that humans no longer carry the receptors for. The pattern of failure to have children, in particular, lines up closely with a primate-only cytomegalovirus that infects chimpanzee pregnancies at high rates. In modern human pregnancies, the matching viral strain cannot infect the placenta. The receptor it uses to bind in chimpanzee tissue does not exist on human cells. The 9th and 10th clusters describe a blood disorder and a stomach disorder. The blood disorder matches a parasite humans cleared from their family line in the deep past. The stomach disorder matches a class of germ infections that great apes catch from the environment, and that the modern human gut microbiome seems to actively suppress. The 11th through 15th clusters describe, in turn, an eye condition that progresses to blindness, a skin condition that produces large sores, a wasting condition affecting only the very young, a condition affecting the spine that the scribe describes as looking like a bent reed, and a final condition described only as the breath that does not return. Each of the 5 matches cleanly onto a known primate disease. Each of the 5 is absent from modern human medicine. The breath that does not return matches the symptom profile of a lung germ that great apes catch in the wild and that humans, in their biology, cannot. 15 entries, 15 primate diseases, 0 human cases on record. Each one, documented in Babylonian, absent from modern human disease records, present in modern primate records. If that were the only problem, the field could call it coincidence. 15 unfamiliar diseases out of 3,000 entries is statistical noise. But then there are the texts. Because the Sumerian creation framework, taken on its own terms, does not call this coincidence, it calls it design. The leak that flagged the match came from a different direction entirely. In 2009, an ancient gene team led by Svante Pääbo at the Max Planck Institute in Leipzig published a paper in Nature comparing the human and chimpanzee genomes at the level of individual working changes. The team found roughly 300 genetic differences that they called adaptive, meaning changes that had been kept on purpose rather than added in by chance. A large share of those adaptive changes grouped in immune system genes. Pääbo's team did not read this as deliberate engineering. They read it as natural selection responding to germ pressure. But they noted, in the paper itself, that the rate of immune changes in the human line was unusual compared to other primate lines. The rate was too high. By the team's own math, the human line was clearing germ weaknesses at 3 to 4 times the expected pace. Modern researchers explain the speed-up through population drops, diet changes, and migration patterns. The Sumerian texts explain it differently. The Atrahasis tradition and the Enki and Ninmah tradition both describe repeated remaking of the human form by the Anunnaki, with clear mention of removing defects from one version to the next. The poem about Umul tells the story of a failed early version. The standard creation story in Atrahasis describes a finished product. Between the two, the gap is full of edits. Sakiku's 15 oddities sit precisely in that gap. They are the diseases the texts say were removed. And then there is the 16th entry. The Sumerian creation framework is steady on this point across every surviving tablet. Humans were given specific traits by design: awareness, speech, reasoning, the ability to bear work. And one more, named directly in Atrahasis on the British Museum fragment BM 78942, in a line that survives in 2 matching copies and is therefore considered reliable. The line states that the gods gave humanity an appointed term, a built-in end date. In the Sumerian king list, catalog number WB444 at the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, the pattern shows up across the ruling families. The pre-flood kings, the rulers from before the flood, are listed with rule lengths in the tens of thousands of years. Alulim ruled for 28,800 years, Alalgar for 36,000, and Menluana for 43,200. Then comes the flood. After the flood, the rule lengths collapse. Meskia-Gasher rules for 324 years, Enmerkar for 420. By the time the list reaches Gilgamesh, the ruler of Uruk in the historical era, the rule length is 126 years. By the historical period, royal rules are measured in normal human terms. The numbers are not random. The reduction is staged, not sudden. Each post-flood ruling family shows a shorter range than the one before, until the figures meet the human norm. If the text is read as a record rather than a myth, what it documents is a step-by-step change to a biological measure applied in batches over time. The early figures are the original design. The later figures are the changed one. The standard scholarly reading is that the long rule lengths are made up large numbers. The Sumerians did not literally believe their early kings lived for 40,000 years. The textual reading is different. Read against Atrahasis, the long rule lengths describe the original human design before the gods changed the appointed term. The shortening across the ruling families documents the change. Mortality, in the Anunnaki framework, was not a defect that the designers missed. It was a feature they installed on purpose and then tightened in stages. That is the 16th entry. The one Sakiku does not need to list, because every patient on every tablet eventually fits it. Aging is the only diagnosis with 100% rate across the human population. It is the only condition the Babylonian scribes never recorded a remedy for, because no remedy exists. The Anunnaki, according to the texts they themselves left, edited the human early version carefully and at length. They removed 15 specific failure modes. They left one in. They left it in on purpose. The Atrahasis text gives the reason. Humans were growing in number too quickly. The earlier model, the one with the long lifespan, had to be changed because the gods could not sleep through the noise of an immortal population that never stopped growing. The text describes the council of the gods debating the change. Some argued for plague, some argued for famine, some argued for the flood. In the end, the appointed term was the solution that scaled. Sakiku's 3,000 entries are, in that frame, a partial list of a single edit. The edits before that one removed the parasites, the retroviruses, the bone conditions, the failures to have children. The edits after that one cannot be done by the patient. Esagil-kin-apli was a careful scholar. He documented the diseases his patients still had. He inherited the absence of the diseases they no longer had. He did not write down the one that was never going to be removed because he did not need to. Every name on every tablet in his archive was already going to end the same way in the long view. 40 clay tablets sit in a single temperature-controlled drawer in the British Museum's basement, exactly where they were in 1923. The standard reference set, cuneiform writing. From the late Bronze Age. Useful for studying old languages, the staff would still tell you, not useful to anyone practicing medicine in the modern world. The room is quiet, the drawer is locked. The 15 entries are still there, listed by tablet and line, without cure, unrecorded in any modern clinic, present in every chimpanzee enclosure on Earth. The 16th entry was never written down. It did not have to be, it is still running. If you want more on the Sumerian creation framework and the genetic record that keeps matching up with it, hit subscribe. The video on screen breaks down another tablet whose contents are showing up in the modern lab record 60 years late. Click it.